Well, Carlton has defeated Essendon at the MCG on the big King's birthday eve match, 11-12-78 to Essendon's 11-4-70. It's a disappointing result in the end. I do have some mixed feelings about this match, as I'm sure you guys do too, and we're going to discuss all of it right now. If you like this channel, hit the like and subscribe buttons. It helps the YouTube algorithm when you do so. It will ensure that you never miss a video. It only takes 1 second to do so. And importantly, it doesn't cost any money. So what are you waiting for? If you haven't subscribed, hit that like and subscribe button right now. So where do we start with this match? It's, in the end, a frustrating result. It's always frustrating to lose to Carlton, but even if you just put aside the rivalry, it doesn't matter who it's against. This is the second week in a row now that we've given away a big lead in the first quarter to a team that was heavily favoured against us, and we've fought our way back and in many ways looked to be the better side in the second half in both of the last two games, and ended up falling short. And you do feel after this game, it is a case of what if. You know, so many what ifs. What if we had turned up to play in the first quarter? What if we had, a few of our injured players back in the back line to stop not just Charlie Curnow, who didn't exactly dominate with 3 contested marks, but it was the second most amount of contested marks in the game. But, their first gamer, Hudson O'Keefe, a guy who's never played a game before, took more contested marks than any other player on the field. He took 5. And you sort of look at that and you think, well, that probably, good on him, but that probably doesn't happen if we have at least a couple of our defenders there. And I thought, Laverde battled admirably against Curnow in the end, just to the naked eye. I mean, I was at the game. I'm narrating this now as I've got home from the game, so I haven't watched it on television with the benefit of commentary or anything. In the end, I felt Curnow probably won the duel to the naked eye. He kicked 2 goals too, so that's, he didn't dominate in terms of on the scoreboard. It kind of felt like he had the better of the duel marginally just to the naked eye, even though Laverde will be happy, that we kept him to 2 goals. And look, if you'd told me before the match that Laverde would keep Curnow to 2 goals, I think we'd be every chance to win, given that Harry Mackay wasn't playing. But the fact that their first gamer takes 6 contested marks, is probably a sign that they really had it over us in the air. And you have a look at the numbers. Carlton took a huge number of uncontested marks. They doubled us in terms of uncontested marks. The Blues took 115 marks to 65 and 16 contested marks to 7. So there's probably the difference in the game when you look at the height that they had compared to us. But what was interesting is that we normally need to take a lot of uncontested marks to win, because that's been our game plan. And we did notice, and I mentioned this on my channel after the Brisbane game, a subtle change in the way we were playing after halftime in the Brisbane game. And I think this shows you that we don't now rely on this game plan. We are adapting ourselves, and maybe this has been forced on us by having the smaller lineup, which we've kind of embraced and gone with. But in the end, some of these injuries may be a bit of a silver lining, because it's forcing us to play on a bit quicker. It's forcing us to not play the uncontested game plan that kind of was working against the average teams, but really hasn't been working against the better teams. And you have to say, even though we lost the game, after quarter time, it probably was working. We were probably having the better of the game, and I thought we looked a bit more dangerous than them. It didn't help in the first quarter that Parrish, given that he was back in the side, and this is not a criticism of Parrish, I thought he had a pretty good game. He had 31 possessions, and it showed that he's obviously a valuable member of the team. But Brad Scott ended up pushing Martin and Merritt out of the midfield in that first quarter. Now, you're probably taking our 2 best players, who are both midfielders, out of the midfield, which is kind of crazy. I mean, you can imagine one of them out of there, but 2 of them both out of there. Really, I think we should have structured the midfield a bit better. And that's not Darcy Parrish's fault. He should be in the team. He had a good game. But really, how do you have both Merritt and Martin not in the midfield? And obviously, we corrected this a little bit in the second, third and fourth quarters. I still think Martin spent too much time in the back line. As I've said it many times, he always kicks goals when he goes forward. And that's what happened in the last quarter. He went forward and kicked a goal. He always does it. I'd much rather see him, even if he plays, genuine mid, I'd rather see him genuine mid pushing forward a little bit and, hitting the scoreboard. But anyway, It is what it is, and the first quarter was disappointing. The most disappointing thing about it, other than I think the lack of structure in the midfield, just was the lack of intensity. It was obvious that we just didn't show up in that first quarter, and Carlton were playing okay, but you know what? We sort of let them play okay, right? There was a number of uncontested marks they took in forward 50. They kicked the first 4 goals of the game. Sard got the first goal. Curnow, Motlop got the third, then McGovern. Great to see Lual in his first game kick a goal with his first kick. It's always fantastic when a player can get a goal with their first kick. I was sitting just in the Shane Warne stand in the third deck, right behind it. Brilliant to see him get that, and really, really warms the heart to see him kick a goal with his first kick before Curnow and Zach Williams kicked goals to finish the quarter for Carlton. They had 6 goals to 1, and just the lack of intensity. And look, I actually hadn't given up, to be honest, at the time, because I really did feel if we're able to lift our intensity, we would be able to put pressure on Carlton. We just weren't putting pressure on them because the intensity wasn't up. Carlton are actually the worst team in the competition for disposal efficiency. But when you're talking about professional footballers, right, at the end of the day, if you're not putting pressure on them, then they're going to look like millionaires, aren't they? It doesn't matter if they're the worst team in the competition for disposal efficiency. At the end of the day, they're all professional footballers, and you can make them look absolutely brilliant if you're not putting pressure on them. But the moment we did put pressure on them, I thought we made them look pretty average, right? Because they really are a pretty average side. That's not an over-the-top criticism. They're just an average side. They're probably not going to make the finals. Their kicking skills are poor, and when we put pressure on them, they did start to turn the ball over, as did we, but we're probably more in a development phase than them. But they are the worst team in the competition for disposal efficiency, and once we started to get that under control and started to lift our intensity, I thought we started to get back into the game. So in the second quarter, we gradually started to work our way back. Fantasia kicked the first goal, which brought the margin out to a game-high 38 points. But Caldwell and Perkins were able to get goals, and Perkins, it was, let's face it, he didn't really have a great game. That was probably the best thing he did, was kicking that goal in the second quarter. He ended up getting subbed off, and I've stated it before, I think his biggest problem is, whilst he's a good athlete, he just sort of doesn't really have that feel for the game. I guess you'd call it footy IQ. It's a bit of I don't really like that term, it's a bit of a funny old term, but he just doesn't quite know where to run to sometimes when you have that transition from forward to defence or from attack to defence, and vice versa when you win the ball back or where you lose the ball. He just doesn't quite seem to have that feel for the game. But anyway, he got that goal in the second quarter. De Koning got another goal for Carlton before Peter Wright kicked an important goal right on the halftime siren. Peter Wright hadn't done a lot up to that point. But the good thing about Peter Wright this season, he is popping up at crucial moments and kicking important goals and involving himself in chains of play that are relevant and noteworthy to the end result. And he also popped up in the third quarter for a couple. But anyway, at half-time, we were down by 28 points. And the feel of the game was that it had evened up in general play. We're obviously a long way down, but certainly their dominance around the ground had evaporated really, and we were probably starting to get on top. Third quarter was really interesting because Patrick Cripps was kept possessionless. He didn't have a touch in the third quarter. Setterfield has having a really good game on him. And look, Patrick Cripps has never really played particularly well against Essendon. We actually have kept him to lower ranking points and lower possession numbers than any other team in the AFL. I'm not sure why that is. Everybody's got a team they don't play particularly well against. But for whatever reason, Cripps doesn't play particularly well against Essendon, or he comes up against taggers or just the mix of players that for whatever reason are able to curtail him. And Cripps really was taken out of that game in the third quarter, and we really started to get on top. We got that goal really, really quickly to Guelphy at the start of the quarter, which meant we essentially had scored 2 goals in 30 seconds when you count the goal to Wright at the end of the second quarter. Then Wright popped up with 2 more goals. Motlop got a goal back for Carlton, which was their only goal of the quarter, and then it was topped off at the end of the quarter with a goal from Gresham, which was from a nice bit of play by Caddy. Caddy didn't have a great game in terms of hitting the scoreboard, but he is a bit of a smart footballer, and he kicked the ball out of midair. I don't think he was necessarily aiming for Gresham, but I think he was just vaguely kicking it in his general direction. But Gresham was able to mark it just outside the goal square and put it through. And we were only 11 points down at three-quarter time. And we were right in the game. And I wouldn't say we were favourites to win the game or anything at that point. At the end of the day, you still need to outscore the opposition by 2 goals in the last quarter. But we had every chance to win the game. And when you look at the last quarter, we ended up kicking the last 3 goals. Carlton got the first 2 goals of the quarter, Akers and Zach Williams, and we finished it up with a goal to Gresham, a bouncing goal that he kicked from outside 50. Martin, as I said, always pops up for a goal when he goes forward. And Dersma kicked the last goal to get us within a goal, and we couldn't get any closer. But there were still some key moments in that last quarter. There was a moment where Durham just turned it over, either missed a mark or turned it over with about 2 minutes to go. There was a 50-metre penalty that went against us. I think Archer Day Wicks gave away a 50-metre penalty for encroaching on the mark. A lot of what-ifs. And Carlton, in the end, they couldn't really get that sealing goal. They didn't get it. They just got a couple of behinds, and the match eventually petered out, and they were able to get the 8-point win. So, a frustrating result for us, a game that we absolutely could have won, no doubt about that. You've got to give credit to the opposition. At the end of the day, they kicked the 6 goals in the first quarter, and that was the difference. But I still can't help but thinking, those 16 contested marks they took to 7, had we had a couple more tall players playing, then it just may have made the difference. So some of the key stats in the match. As you can see, Carlton narrowly led with disposals, had a lot more kicks. We had a lot more handballs. I don't like that sort of 1-to-1 kick to handball ratio that we've got, 188 kicks to 174 handballs. Carlton had a 2-to-1 kick to handball ratio, but I think that was more because we didn't want to just bomb it because of our lack of height. We really needed to move the ball by hand, and we really needed to run with it. So I can kind of understand what the team was doing, and I think it probably kind of worked. I think as the team evolves and we get some of our players back from injury, we probably need to get that more up to a 2-to-1 ratio. I think a 1-to-1 ratio long term is probably not what you're looking for. Inside 50s were even. Stoppages were pretty even, 39-38. Centre clearances, 11-9. This is an area that Carlton are particularly good at, and they didn't really dominate. It was essentially 50-50. One of the reasons we were able to get back into the game in the last 3 quarters. Contested possessions were pretty even, 155-144, as were uncontested possessions. The big difference in the game was the marks. Look at that, 115 marks to 65 and 16 marks to 7, 14 marks inside 50 to 11. Look, we did well to have 11 marks inside 50. We've struggled with that particular stat this year, and at least we were able to get a few good shots on goal. Tackles inside 50, we've been tackles inside 50, we've been the worst team in the competition at this particular stat, 10-10, and that's really about it. 1%ers, we had a few more than Carlton, 51-43. So how did each of the individual players go? Well, Jai Caldwell was very, very good again, 26 possessions, 102 ranking points. I thought he was probably our best player. Nick Martin was also very good, got done in defence for that deliberate rush behind. I think, look, the biased person in me says, well, why do they happen to pay it? I think it's probably there. The question is, why do they pick it out at that time? But the other thing is, why was he playing down there? Why was he playing down there? Put him at least in the midfield. Don't have him running around in the back line. I think he's wasted in the back line. And then when he makes an error in the back line, it makes it even worse. But look, he had a good game. 32 possessions, kicked a goal, 112 ranking points. Darcy Parish had 31 possessions, 13 contested possessions, which was the third most amount of contested possessions. Caldwell had 15 contested possessions. Peter Wright kicked 3 goals, and if you told me before the game he'd kicked 3 goals, I would have been very happy, given that whilst the rain stayed away, it was obviously a little bit sort of slippery and dewy and a cold night. So he definitely had an impact, and he definitely, if we had won the game, we certainly could have pointed to Peter Wright's contribution. Gresham is interesting. Gresham is a player that does divide opinion. I thought he was pretty average in the first half, but I thought he was pretty good in the second half. I thought he worked hard to get into the game, and he kicked 2 goals, and he involved himself in some key passages of play. Definitely his second half was better than his first half. He was ranked our 5th best player, so you can take that for what it's worth. Andrew McGrath did a typical Andrew McGrath game. He had 23 possessions, turned the ball over a couple of times. I think he might have been playing on Motlop from what I could see. Motlop kicked a couple of goals. If I'm wrong on that, you guys can correct me. Like I said, I was watching from the stand. Sometimes you miss a few things. Durham was involved in an incident which may see him suspended, so we'll see how that pans out. He had 15 contested possessions, sensational, 27 possessions all up, and he's just a fantastic player. Zach Johnson in his second game, 18 possessions, 6 contested possessions, 84 ranking points in only his second game. And he's such a good kick. And I think he's going to give us a lot of exciting passages of play off the half-back line over his career. I thought he looked really good, and it was a bit of a step up from him from his first game last week against Brisbane, and hopefully he stays in the team. Merritt had a quiet one, only got the 14 possessions. He's had quiet games against Carlton before. Remember, he had a quiet game against Carlton last year. Probably one of the reasons why Brad Scott was maybe proactive, moving him away. He was in the back line for a little bit in the first quarter and didn't really have a big influence on the game. Setterfield had the 17 possessions. It looked like he was playing on Patrick Cripps for the night, and he kept Patrick Cripps to his worst game of the year, so a big tick to Setterfield. Dersma had 20 possessions and kicked an important goal in the last quarter. I thought he was a good contributor for us. Luaman Luar, one thing I noticed about him, I was watching him closely as it was his first game, his tackling is fantastic. He had 6 tackles, and boy, oh boy, if you get tackled by him, you feel it. All right, so he had 11 possessions and kicked a goal. Interesting to see that he lined up on the wing. I was watching where he would go at the start of the game. I thought he might go to the halfback flank or something, but he lined up on a wing. So it will be interesting to see what they do with him for the rest of the year if he remains in the team, whether that will be his position. He's been playing mainly across halfback in the reserves, but he did train as a wingman in the pre-seasons. That's probably why they brought him into the team. Angus Clark, I'm going to love this player. He had 14 possessions, kicked it behind, but every time I see him, he feels like he's already played 200 games. Right? He's 3 or 4 games into his career now, and it just feels so natural that he's a part of the team. And I'm going to make a prediction. I don't think, barring injury and coming back from injury, I don't think he'll be playing reserves at all again. I think he's going to be one of our best players, and I think he's going to be a 200 to 250 game player. He just has fitted into the team absolutely naturally. And I think of all the people that have made their debut this year, he's going to be the pick of the bunch. That would be my prediction. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Matt Guelphy had 9 possessions and kicked a goal. He was solid without being spectacular. Laverty had the 9 possessions, played on Curnow. Probably was beaten, but Curnow only kicked the 2 goals, so you could make a case for Laverty. At the end of the day, he did pretty well. Archie Roberts only had the 14 possessions, normally averages well over 20. I think what I've noticed with Roberts, I don't know what you guys think, let me know in the comments. I feel as though he's looking for the cheap possession a little bit sometimes, and he turned the ball over a couple of times, and he's always sort of looking for that little handball out the back. But he didn't have one of his better games tonight, at least in my view. Caddy just had the 10 touches and didn't hit the scoreboard. It wasn't really his night. He did a couple of nice little goal assists, especially that little kick off the ground to Gresham, which was as good as a goal. Pryor had no real impact on the game, 13 possessions. Perkins, 11 touches, only 33 ranking points, kicked a goal in the second quarter and got subbed off. Hobbs, just the 8 possessions and had no impact on the game. It was a disappointing game from Hobbs. I think Hobbs' position in the team is in jeopardy. It wouldn't surprise me if he was dropped to the reserves next week. Goldstein battled away but ended up being beaten by De Koning. De Koning had a really good game and was Carlton's highest ranked player with 146 ranking points. And Goldstein, look, he's doing what we need him to do. He's battling away. We know we're a bit undermanned in the ruck. It may be time for a rest next week. He did have a 10-day break prior to this game. Might have been the reason why he wasn't rested. And I reckon there's a good chance that Vigo Vicentini could come into the team. We did debut a ruckman in the VFL, Blackiston, who had played, we picked up in the mid-season draft as a 200-centimetre ruckman. But Blackiston played as a defender and had 11 intercept possessions. So it looks like Blackiston isn't going to be playing in the ruck, at least initially, and we're probably looking at what he can give us in defence. So I think if Goldstein does get replaced, it probably will be by Vigo and not Blackiston. Kako had no real impact on the game, just had the 1 kick, but had the 9 handballs, interestingly, and Archer Day Wicks just had the 6 touches, came on as the sub, unfortunately gave away that 50-metre penalty for encroaching across the mark in the last quarter. So that was the game. What do you guys think? Did any of you go to the game? This was my 53rd Essendon Carlton game. Could you believe? I've been to about 1/5 of all the Essendon Carlton games that have ever been played. And it wasn't quite the result we were after, but at the end of the day, it was a good fight back by the Bombers. I'm getting sick of these honourable losses. It's going to be tough next week. We're playing Geelong, and I'm not really confident in that one at all, and I'll have a review of that one up early in the week. But anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. Let me know what you guys think. Like and subscribe to this channel. Have a great day, everybody. And as always, go Bombers.